In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
A long time ago, when Ben and Emma were little, they loved watching VeggieTales. It's a cartoon that features singing, dancing vegetables, in case you've never had the pleasure. Many of the songs and skits tell a story from the Bible, or they have a Christian message like forgiveness, or patience, or my favorite, honoring your parents. Now, actually, my favorite features a cucumber named Larry, a chickpea, and a grape wearing an eye patch singing The Pirates Who Don't Do Anything. And it goes something like this. Sing along if you'd like. We are the pirates who don't do anything. We just stay at home and lie around. And if you ask us to do anything, we'll just tell you we don't do anything. A lot of people knew that. Counseling will open in my office 15 minutes after the close of worship. My favorite verse, though, is the middle one. And I never hoist the mainstay, and I never swab the poop deck, and I never veer to starboard, because I never sail at all. I mean, it's ridiculous. Vegetables that are pirates, but pirates that don't do piratey things. I mean, in a way, it's good, I guess, because, pirates hijack ships and take hostages and demand ransoms and steal cargo. But, when you look at VeggieTales, which focuses so much about the life of faith, about what it means to be a Christian, we can detect in these do-nothing pirates something a little bit more serious, like what it means to be a do-nothing Christian. And that's really not funny, because some people claim to be Christians, but if you ask them to do anything, they'll just tell you, we don't do anything. And that's a problem for the church and for people who like the idea of being a Christian but might not have a clear idea of what that means. And we have all been in that boat before. The boat of the do-nothing Christian, where anchor doesn't get weighed and the sails aren't unfurled. In his letter, James addresses this very problem, encouraging us to be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror, for they look at themselves and on going away, forget what they look like. What James means is that people who sing, we are the Christians who don't do anything, are horribly mistaken, because there is no such thing as a Christian who doesn't do anything. Christians are people who take action, motivated by gratitude, inspired by grace. The fullness of our faith is found through activity, through merciful ministry, which sometimes means remaining silent when we'd really rather speak up. More about that in a minute. But without this pattern of practice, any Christian faces a terrible crisis of identity. The inactive Christian doesn't really know who they are, because their behavior doesn't reflect in the mirror who they say or think that they are. We can see this operating with the Pharisees. They were not intrinsically evil people. Yes, they were strong opponents of Jesus, but these guys were experts in the Torah. And the Torah contained 613 laws. Some pretty specific ones, too. So people relied on the Pharisees to help them make sense of it all, to give practical guidance on how to stay faithful in their covenant with God. Pharisees helped people figure out how you could reinterpret and apply these ancient laws for new present-day situations. And a lot of those laws, since food is so central to who we are, deal with what you can and cannot eat or drink, and how you're supposed to prepare it, and how you're supposed to consume it. So when the Pharisees criticized Jesus because some of his disciples were not washing up before dinner, ostensibly they were just filling their purpose, intending to help. But it's pretty obvious that's not what they intended at all. Instead, they wanted to make Jesus look bad because he was a threat to their turf. His healings and feedings and exorcisms and words of wisdom were convincing more and more people that Jesus knew what was best for them. So the Pharisees fought him. They looked for opportunities to portray him as a man who did not respect tradition and was therefore radical and dangerous. But Jesus saw right through them. In the Gospel of Matthew, he told them, "You strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel." In other words, you Pharisees have lost all perspective on what you are doing and why. And without perspective, we become superficial, focused only on appearances instead of what really matters. And to the Pharisees, Jesus said, "This is made plain in how you have abused the law as a weapon against me." Your intent to harm no longer matches up with the purpose God has given you to help. You complain not to correct the disciples, but to discredit me. You've lost your identity. You no longer know who you are. Fortunately, God can put anything to good use. Through the Pharisees and their anger and sense of superiority, Jesus teaches us the difference between being faithful and being a sinner is the same distance between our intent and God's purpose for our lives. And the farther apart our intent and God's purpose gets for our lives, the less perspective we have, the more we live superficially, and without that perspective, it's hard to know where we even are. But that loss of perspective is also helpful, because if you sense yourself losing perspective, you know that your intent and God's purposes are moving apart. When our intentions stray from God's purpose for our lives, when we live on the surface instead of in the depths, then we're sinning. And it's hard to reconcile the two. To hold your tongue when everybody else is wagging theirs as fast as it will go, that can be a very loving thing to do, but tough, real tough. To be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, that seems evasive, even cowardly to many in the world. But when we do speak faithfully, words of love pour forth. They seem insincere to the cynic, incomprehensible to some. But that's how God's purpose finds expression through our intentional words and silences. And it's in that unity that we know the fullness of faith. We experience and express true life, full of integrity and perspective, a life where deception and rancor has no place. And it feels good not to worry about what people want to see, not to worry about what other people expect us to be, but simply to be who we are as children of a loving God. And with patience, we will receive the blessing of being made whole, not shallow and fragmented, but whole, integrated, unified. We don't have to spend our lives tied up into emotional and spiritual knots. We can live straight up because God chooses to help us close the distance between purpose and intent, making the two one, giving us true perspective that reveals the wise way to live. To be Christians, we are called to pursue this wholeness. And the only way we can find it is to follow Jesus, to be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves, to act with integrity and mercy for the people who hurt and have need. Only in that type of faithful action can we discover our true identity. We can't be the Christians who don't do anything, because that's a blatant contradiction in terms. And there is no joy, no hope, no peace in it for anyone. So why would we even bother? But when we receive the grace to accept the word with meekness and act on what it says and do something, remembering that sometimes doing something is to remain silent, we get the clarity that we need and the power to be kind. And that gives us all hope for the future of God in our lives and in our world.